Hello guys, it's Zelos here, and today we're continuing forensics. That sounds weird, but that's exactly how I say it.
Forensic.
Now, with that out of the way, let's get into it. Chapter 1, World of Forensics. Forensics. What is the role of forensic science? A dead body lays on the ground. A faceless necklace has disappeared from a jewelry store. The house burns down after its owner receives a threatening letter. In each of these scenarios, the police are called to the crime scene. Now it's their job to answer the question, what happened here? The scene of a crime. The primary crime scene is the original location of crime or accident. The crime scene is different for each crime. It could be a room, a house, the surrounding property, or even the entire neighborhood. At minimum, the crime scene must include the exact spot where the crime took place. It must also include areas where the site can be entered or exited. Sometimes key pieces of evidence are found outside the primary crime scene. A drop gun or muddy footprint may be found in another room or down the street. These alternative locations are the secondary crime scenes. Police officers are usually the first to arrive at the crime scene. The police assesses the scene and answer questions such as, did a crime occur here? Then they determine what type of crime and where exactly did the crime occur. They follow a strict set of procedures and ensure no evidence at the scene is lost, damaged, or contaminated. To prevent damage, police secure the crime scene. They mark the perimeter of the scene and block access with bright yellow police tape that bears a printed warning such as crime scene, do not cross. Police detectives must also interview people in the area who may be eyewitnesses or persons of interest in the crime. The forensic team, who looks at the evidence after police secure the crime scene, they call in crime scene specialists. In larger cities, the forensic team may include specialists who focus on one specific aspect of the crime scene, such as fingerprints or tool marks. In smaller cities, the forensic team may be only a few people who perform multiple roles, functions, or even a single officer. Forensic scientists are usually not police officers. In larger regions, the forensic team may have a special crime scene investigation (CSI) unit. Members of the CSI units are trained to recognize, collect, and preserve evidence at a crime scene. When called to the scene, they search for, collect, and document items such as fibers, glass fragments, and blood splatter. CSI photographers take pictures of the entire area and close shots of specific pieces of evidence. If CSI unit discovers evidence that should be handled by an expert, they may call in specialists such as forensic entomologists who analyze insects or forensic anthropologists who recover and examine human remains to help identify a person. Sometimes a district annotator, the medical examiner, may be called to a crime scene. The district annotator can issue a search warrant if police detectives need a follow-up on a lead discovered a crime scene. When a body is found, the medical examiner can examine it and examine a permanent cause of death. Puzzle pieces of the crime. Forensic scientists search crime scenes to find evidence and then they analyze it to determine how it fits into the overall picture. Evidence can help the investigative team recreate what happened at the crime scene. It can also lead them to a suspect and link him or her to the crime scene. For example, if investigators find a suspect fingerprints at the scene, they can reasonably infer that the suspect was present at the scene. In court, the prosecutor presents a forensic evidence to the jury to support a case against it. Defendant. Evidence can prove that a crime was committed or help investigators understand a crime's key elements. Using blood splatter patterns, investigators may be able to recreate the movements of people at the crime scene. Evidence such as DNA or fingerprints may also help investigators discover the identity of a victim or suspect. It may also link a suspect to a crime scene or a victim. In some cases, evidence supports a suspect who claims to be innocent. For example, if DNA evidence is found at the crime scene that does not match the suspect's DNA, investigators may need to search for another person. Evidence may also provide clues for detectives to follow as they investigate the crime. Types of evidence. Evidence at a crime scene can take many forms. Testimonial evidence includes oral or written statements from eyewitnesses. Physical evidence includes what is found at the crime scene on the victim or in the suspect's possession. Physical evidence can find fingerprints, documents, glass fragments, bullets, and shell casings. It also includes biological and trace evidence. Biological evidence includes organic items such as blood, saliva, hair, plants, and insects. Trace evidence includes very small but measurable objects such as hair strands, fibers, or skin cells. Some trace evidence is also biological evidence. Some types of evidence are more reliable than others. Physical evidence such as fingerprints and biological evidence such as DNA strongly link a suspect to a crime scene. On the other hand, eyewitnesses' testimony can frequently be wrong, making it a weaker link. Evidence can also be reconstructive or associative. Reconstructive evidence answers the questions of who, what, where, how, and when, and helps investigators piece together the events. Broken glass or door locks may show where a criminal entered and exited the crime of a scene. Footprints and bullet trajectories may determine where everyone was located and how the events unfolded. Blood splatter may reveal clues of how the victim was attacked or how he or she died. Associative evidence such as suspect crime scene fingerprints, footprints, hair, fibers, blood, and other objects and substances proved that a suspect was at the scene. Associative evidence can prove that someone other than the suspect was present at the crime scene. Crime scene protocol. Processing a crime scene is a long, tremendous process. The CSI team documents the conditions at the scene and collects any evidence that might be a clue to what happened, who was involved. As a CSI might collect dried blood drops, pass tool mark impressions, pick fibers from a victim's shirt, or scrape cells from underneath the victim's fingernails. At the same time, CSI ensures that all the evidence is safely collected and served. If evidence is contaminated or damaged before the crime scene analyzes it, the lab may never be able to identify it or link it to a suspect. When a CSI team arrives at the crime scene, they first interview the police officer at the scene to determine what's already known about the crime, who did it, and how it happened. The CSI team also checks to make sure the police has secured the crime scene. Protecting crime scene is based on Locker's exchange principle. Every person who enters the scene may take away key trace evidence while at the same time leaving behind traces of their presence that interfere with CSI's investigation. CSI interviews police to determine who has entered or exited the crime scene and if any objects removed. Then the CSI carefully examines and walks through the crime scene to get a general idea of the area and its layout. The walkthrough helps the CSI identify possible points of entry and exit from the crime scene. Throughout the walkthrough, the CSI is extremely careful not to disturb or touch anything. Next, the CSI documents everything at the crime scene, using detailed notes, sketches, photographs, and video. The CSI's documentation includes the overall description of the crime scene, a list of possible evidence. He or she photographs and sketches the overall scene, showing each piece of evidence in relation to the others. Investigators will also measure and record the distance of each piece of evidence from two fixed points such as a wall, tree, or sidewalk. The investigator systematically searches the area, usually moving in the geogrammic pattern, to make sure no inch of the scene is missed. In an evidence log, the CSI describes each piece and records when, where, and whom it was found, as well as who transported it to the crime lab. Each potential piece of evidence is tagged, photographed, and packaged so it can be sent back to the lab. CSI will photograph objects, lift fingerprints, and cast or photograph impressions of tool marks. To find trace fibers and stains, the CSI may use an alternative light source and tweezers. The investigator may also vacuum carpet and furniture in the crime scene for trace evidence that escapes the investigator's eye. As the scene is processed, the CSI packages each piece of evidence separately to preserve it and prevent damage. CSI use envelopes, canisters, bottles, and paper and plastic bags to package evidence. For liquid evidence, the CSI may choose an unbreakable, airtight container. For moist or wet evidence, the CSI may use a container with airflow that allows the evidence to dry out. In addition to sampling evidence, the CSI also gathers control samples from the crime scene. A control sample is something like a hair, fiber, or fingerprint from a known source. The crime lab will compare the control sample against the evidence found at the crime scene. For example, hairs found on a victim's jacket may be compared to the hairs from the victim's head and the hairs of other people who live in the victim's house. The hair doesn't match any of the control samples. Investigators know they have discovered a potential clue may help identify the criminal. While collecting crime scene evidence, investigators are careful to follow the document of a chain of custody for each piece of evidence. Chain of custody is a continuous record that shows every person who has touched evidence from the time it is discovered at the crime scene. While it is collected and transported to the crime lab until it is processed at the lab, every person who handles a piece of evidence must be documented in the chain of custody record. Develop a hypothesis. While a forensic team searches the crime scene and possesses the evidence, they develop an initial working hypothesis of the crime. What happened there? In what order did events happen? Based on the position of evidence, the team develops an idea who was at the scene and where they were. They build a theory about the sequence of events. The team considers each new piece of evidence. Does it support their hypothesis of a crime? Yes, the initial hypothesis of the crime. Does it support? If yes, the initial hypothesis becomes stronger. However, if investigators find evidence that does not fit the hypothesis, the team must rethink the theory suggested to fit new evidence. At the crime lab. The crime lab processes evidence collected by investigators at the crime scene. Small local labs are usually equipped for basic testing and analysis. Larger regional and state crime labs often offer more services and testing, while the FBI laboratory performs almost every forensic test available. The FBI laboratory also maintains databases of items such as fingerprints and DNA that investigators around the country may use at the lab. At a lab, forensic scientists perform a variety of tests. Drug chemistry tests identify the presence of legal and illegal drugs. Trace chemistry tests compare and identify materials left from fires, explosions, and paints. Latent prints are processed to compare fingerprints recovered at the crime scene to individuals. Microscopic examine compares and analyzes hairs, fibers, soils, and other materials. Firearm tests compare guns, fire bullets, and gunpowder patterns. Documents found at the scene are examined to identify handwriting, ink, paper, printers, and other characteristics that would help locate the source. Each test helps investigators build a clear image of what happened at the crime scene. And time for today, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed. And I'll see you guys again very, very soon. Later.